These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. In 1910's France, the Hugo brothers tower over their family, turning a simple studio photo into a scale illusion. Baptiste Hugo was said to be 2.30 meters and 201 kilograms. This grainy view through a German ship optical sight shows the British ship Glowworm in the North Sea on April 8, 1940, with ruler-like marks turning the sea into a measurement. Glowworm sits unusually low in the water amid white spray. Phnom Penh, April 17, 1975. Khmer Rouge forces ride trucks through the city streets as flags wave. This photo records the takeover day when Cambodia came under Khmer Rouge control. Milan, Italy, autumn, 1977. A masked member of the group Armed Proletarians for Communism runs through a near-empty street. His outstretched arm aims a small handgun-shaped object toward Italian Interior Ministry officers. Over Moscow on July 26, 1941, parachute flares hang in the clouds above the dark skyline of onion domes. Air defense crews track German aircraft by this floating light, which illuminates the ground for navigation in the blackout. California, 1909. Korean nationalist Jang In-hwan is photographed in custody, holding a board with prisoner number 23,295, and his age 32. He was convicted in a political case tied to pro-Japan lobbying. A man in a suit shakes hands with a robed speaker as hooded Ku Klux Klan members sit behind them next to a large United States flag. The caption ties the meeting to talks with the German-American Bund about cooperation. Sinai Peninsula, 1967. An open truck packed with Egyptian prisoners passes within meters of an Israeli armored column. One frame captures both sides on the same road, with faces exposed and no cover in the empty desert. This grainy 1935 photo shows a man seated inside a glass front box, staged for a public endurance stunt. The caption names him Albert Wally and claims he was displayed for 30 days with no food. In 1941, Westinghouse promoted an electric razor with an X-ray image showing the shaver pressed to a man's jaw, with his skull and glasses visible. The stunt captured the razor's moving parts during a real shaving demonstration. Dick Smith's makeup tests for the 1961 television version of The Picture of Dorian Gray show a step-by-step aging effect across 10 photos. Each stage adds new prosthetic layers and texture until the final face looks drastically transformed. In 1923, a French soldier stands guard on a rail car loaded with coal briquettes paid by Germany as post-war reparations. The photo turns fuel into a counted asset, protected like cash on open tracks. Fire erased the downtown blocks. The photo is titled, "I Sit Guard," and reads like a joke, with a lone watchman posed in front of a broken wall. Munich, early 1970s. A masked man steps through a glass doorway as a plainclothes police officer approaches from the street. This frame is linked to the Munich Olympic security incident, captured like a frozen surveillance shot at the entrance. Poland, 1946. Uniformed guards oversee the return of Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an ermine carried in a crate at a railway depot. The painting is considered priceless, and its formal insurance value has been estimated around 500 to 900 million United States dollars. A staged shot from the 1969 film The Battle of Britain shows a German-marked aircraft in a steep tilted drop beside a bare steel tower. Special effects smoke and park service vehicles expose the movie set illusion. Berlin, 1931. An experimental Audi Type K with a smooth aerodynamic body drives past the Brandenburg Gate during a public test run. Its shape was designed by Paul Jarret, an aerodynamic specialist who applied airship-style streamlining to road cars. New York City, United States, 1959. Workers install a full-scale blue whale model suspended under the ceiling at the American Museum of Natural History. The miniature people and scaffolding show how museum life-size can be larger than a city room. Osaka Harbor, Japan, June 1, 1945. A United States Army Air Force's aerial photo captures the port grid from high altitude as thick smoke columns rise. Dozens of bright trails mark objects falling toward the waterfront, and the frame is labeled "Incendiary Strike" on the negative. Rome Olympic Stadium, Italy, 1969. Rows of plastic mannequins fill the stands as a fake crowd for the film The Games. The set used about 50,000 figures, turning a stadium into a silent audience. July 1943, near Kursk, a German Tiger I armored vehicle sits so close to a wooden house that its long barrel nearly reaches the roof. Weighing about 57 tons, it dwarfs the village and shows how heavy machines could choke small roads. A young man in a dark suit and hat holds a bundled infant close to the camera, making the baby look surprisingly large in the frame. The caption claims Leningrad 1985, but the photo itself shows no visible names. Iraq 1991. Oil well control crews kneel in an oil-soaked field beside a high-pressure spray used to shut a damaged well. Thick haze on the horizon shows how far the spill spread while they worked at ground level. Tokyo, March 10, 1945. An aerial photo shows a huge city grid reduced to flattened blocks, with canals and a few tall buildings still standing. The hard line between intact streets and empty zones reveals how an entire district changed in a single night. In 1945, British officers posed beside the 800mm Dora rail cannon projectile and its propellant charge, both taller than the men. One projectile weighed several tons and had to be handled like industrial machinery. German freight supply containers lie ready for air delivery to units cut off at Stalingrad, with one cylinder opened to show tightly packed parcels. Their thick metal shells were built to survive hard landings, so food and gear could reach people with no road access. In 1901, Gustav Whitehead poses beside a Batwing-style glider with a narrow central body built for one pilot. Some aviation historians claim he made engine-powered flights 2 years before the Wright brothers, keeping this machine in the "who flew first" debate. A museum display shows a heap of prosthetic limbs, braces, and crutches taken from people held at Auschwitz. The sheer volume turns personal mobility into anonymous inventory. China, 1960s. Cultural Revolution. A massive rally watches officials on a stage during a public self-criticism session. The men stand bent forward on stools while the crowd below holds flags, banners, and portrait placards. Vietnam War. An aerial photo shows fields covered with hundreds of round craters left by B-52 drops. The tight, repeating rows map the aircraft flight paths across the landscape. United States, 1923. A 10-cent Orphans Relief for Soviet Russia certificate claims the holder has fed a hungry little orphan of Soviet Russia for 1 day. It was issued by Friends of Soviet Russia in New York City. California, 1919. A crowd stands and sits on a beached whale covered in large painted graffiti words. The writing and poses show it was treated like a public billboard and photo platform, not a natural site. Antwerp, 1941. German soldiers pose in improvised Walpurgis night costumes with headscarves, aprons, and skirts outside a brick building. The staged group photo shows frontline uniforms swapped for comic disguise on a single evening. Finland, 1941 to 1944. Women in headscarves pour hot liquid filler into 152mm metal casings on a long assembly line. The identical rows show mass production by hand, where one spill could ruin an entire batch. A man identified in the caption as Adolf Hitler signs an autograph for a Catholic nun at an outdoor table. Her cross necklace and his signature card sit inches apart in the same frame. March 1945 in China. Japanese crews painted a full-scale Boeing B-29 on the ground near an airfield, shaded to look like it was flying above the fields. One engine was drawn as damaged to tempt Allied pilots to descend for a closer look and drift into hidden air defense positions. Camberley, Britain, 1945. Princess Elizabeth in Auxiliary Territorial Service uniform works under a vehicle hood as Queen Elizabeth watches beside her. The future queen trained as a driver and mechanic, and this photo catches the royal family in grease and tools, not crowns. Seddon Crater at the Nevada test site was created by an underground nuclear test in 1962 and is about 390 meters wide and about 100 meters deep. The access road shows its scale, and the site was used to study large Earth moving by a single test. London, 1942. A Home Guard fighter models street camouflage made from torn strips of old wallpaper draped over his helmet and jacket. The photo shows a low-cost disguise plan for blending into blasted walls and debris. A close-up shows a novelty sarcophagus ring that opens like a tiny coffin, with a miniature mummy as the second piece. The caption dates it to 1933, part of the Egypt mania that followed Howard Carter's 1922 discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Budapest, November, 1944. The Margaret Bridge is split and dropped into the Danube, leaving a tram and cars trapped at the broken edge. It was accidentally brought down by the Wehrmacht during demolition work. United States, 1940s. A salon machine seals a clear hood around a woman's head, while a hose draws air from the chamber. It was marketed as a low-pressure beauty treatment that could make the face look pinker. United States, 1969. And wanted by FBI poster for escaped federal prisoner Benjamin Hoskins Paddock shows his mugshots, fingerprint blocks, and a long list of aliases. The sheet includes his physical description and a caution notice for anyone who might spot him. A colorized school-style portrait shows a teenage boy with short dark hair and a striped sweater, dated by the caption to the early 1960s. The caption identifies him as Pablo Escobar. A 1964 backstage photo shows 4 young men posing beside an oversized snowman prop with a top hat and 4 round buttons. The caption says, "The Beatles," but the scene is clearly a stage set with curtains, stairs, and studio gear. Japan, 1945. Young women and teenagers bow beside a truck as uniformed military pilots in flight gear raise their hands in farewell. The scene shows a public send-off as the pilots ride toward an airfield for a one-way mission. South Australia, 1943. 2 young women in dark goggles and heavy gloves oxy-weld stacks of metal ammunition box parts on a factory line. The bright sparks and identical plates show mass production built piece by piece. A large crowd gathers around a small airplane on a grassy field, with a registration code starting with NX painted across the wing. Charles Lindbergh became world famous in 1927 by flying solo non-stop from New York to Paris across the Atlantic Ocean. President Harry Truman smiles while holding up the signed instrument of Japan's surrender, 1945. The page shows Japanese characters above a block of signatures, capturing the moment a major conflict was formally closed. Soviet Union, 1941 to 1945. A heavy artillery crew rests beside 2 280mm rounds that stand almost as tall as the men. Each round could weigh about 246 kilograms, showing the extreme logistics behind one shot. United States, 1890. A barber chart asks, "How do you want your hair cut?" and numbers 15 head shapes plus beard and mustache options. The bottom line reads, "Copyright 1890 by A.J. Cole," showing an early standardized menu for men's styles. Rhineland, March 1945. German women shovel soil back into a long trench near the western edge of Cologne after the area was taken by United States forces. The line of workers and the fresh earth show how quickly field defenses were erased. Lippstadt, April, 1945. Women walk a muddy street carrying bottles with crowds gathered outside storefronts. The caption says they were freed forced workers from a Buchenwald subcamp at a vehicle plant, photographed after a liquor shop was looted during the Allied advance. United States, 1910. A 50-horsepower steam tractor sits on massive steel wheels with a tall smokestack and a roofed driver platform. Its ribbed metal rims were built for grip on soft fields before rubber farm tires became common. A collage pairs a Rocky Mountain News front page reading, "Plane dynamiting is confessed," with a photo of commercial aircraft wreckage in a hangar. The overlaid caption claims John Graham planted a timed suitcase device for insurance fraud, making it an early case of commercial flight sabotage. India, 1890. The caption says Prince Alexander Mikhailovich poses with companions beside a leashed cheetah used for fast game coursing. Several antelope lie on the ground, showing how trained cheetahs were used as elite status tools in colonial-era sport. New York City, 143 Hudson Street, December 1911 at 3:30 in the afternoon. A family sits in a basement tenement sorting a mountain of nuts on the kitchen table. The cramped room, coats on the wall, and children watching show-home piecework turned into an assembly line. Los Angeles, 1927. Babe Ruth stands by a train as women pose with him holding an oversized telescope next to a sign that reads, "Movie Land welcomes Babe." The staged prop and greeting show Hollywood branding him like a film star the moment he arrived. This newspaper piece shouts, "Imagine looking pretty in a gas mask," and shows two women modeling different respirator designs, including one with round goggles and a clearer face view. It captures the 1930s moment when ordinary people were urged to own respirators. A 1926 photo, linked to Hans Prinzhorn's Outsider art book, shows a woman from behind with dense tattoos, including a lion across her shoulders and small seams running down both arms. Her tight corset and the inked skin clash like two different lives stitched onto one body. London, 1980. Armed special forces in dark gear move along a balcony during the Iranian embassy siege. The image freezes the assault moment mid-step, with one man aiming while others stack behind him. Germany, early 1900s. A uniformed soldier poses beside a much shorter comrade, and the caption calls him Germany's tallest soldier. The text on the photo claims Joseph's height was about 2 meters 40 centimeters. Arizona, 1873. Ancestral Puebloan cliff dwellings sit under a giant sandstone overhang striped by centuries of wind and rain. Many communities left sites like this by about 1400, leaving stone rooms hidden in plain sight. In 1943, a Red Army soldier drinks from the water jacket of a Maxim, a water-cooled field weapon during extreme heat. That jacket could hold several liters, so crews sometimes used it as an emergency canteen when clean water was scarce. A group of Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet pose outdoors wearing gas masks during a civil defense practice, year 1942. Their religious habits and identical masks show how even church communities trained for emergency conditions. This is a Tamalpais Publications identification card for photojournalist Thomas J. Hurst with his portrait and signature. The card shows an expiration date of January 1, 1994. A motor vehicle carries a giant camera model as a Kodak advertisement, turning the street into a rolling billboard in 1912. The oversized lens and accordion bellows make it look like a real camera you could climb into. Women in headscarves crowd the back of a wooden truck, stretching their hands toward a man who is passing out small slips. It reads like a scarce breadline, with tired faces packed close in a rural field. A driver sits far back in a slingshot dragster with enormous rear tires filling most of the frame on a drag strip. This design put the seat behind the rear axle to boost grip during very fast runs. A dark, grainy print shows a full handprint with bright oval fingertips and fine crease lines across the palm. A typed label at the bottom reads, Herr Adolf Hitler and Hotel Kaiserhof, Berlin, making it look like a cataloged handprint from 1938. Two Soviet cosmonauts in bright orange flotation suits sit atop a sea recovery capsule with Cyrillic letters for the Soviet Union painted across the front during training in 1987. The exercise rehearsed post-splashdown survival and pickup procedures before flights to the Mir orbital station. Rail cars lie off the track on an embankment in Kharkov Governorate, photographed in 1888 after the Russian Empire's imperial train derailment. Small groups of onlookers and scattered debris at the base of the slope show how quickly a guarded journey became a wide-open scene. Adolf Hitler inspects the Ferdinand heavy armored vehicle, while engineer Ferdinand Porsche stands beside him, tying the machine directly to Porsche's early engineering work. Its rare gasoline-electric drive was so complex that only about 90 were built before the design was renamed and revised. Taken in the White House in 1997, this Sarah Marian's photo shows Donald Trump with his sons Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump standing beside First Lady Hillary Clinton. It freezes a friendly meeting almost 19 years before Trump and Clinton faced each other in the 2016 United States presidential race. Photographed at Parinui, New Zealand, in 1902, 3 Maori women stand in hand-woven cloaks with dense tassels that signaled rank and identity. One cloak like this could take months to make from New Zealand flax and was often kept as a family heirloom. In 1905, a crowd in hats gathers outside the First State Bank in newly founded Las Vegas, Nevada, while nearby signs advertise lemonade, peanuts, and oranges. Las Vegas was born that same year from a railroad land auction. Eleanor Roosevelt smiles into a large radio microphone in Los Angeles, California, turning a public moment into a broadcast. She held more than 300 press conferences that opened jobs for women reporters and later helped shape the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Inside a high-altitude chamber, a nurse adjusts breathing gear on trainees while another writes down readings, recreating the thin air found miles above Earth. These drills taught crews to spot early low oxygen signs like slow thinking and tunnel vision before they ever took off. Around 1914 to 1918, therapists used this big dial device to measure how far a wrist could bend and straighten, turning recovery into numbers. Its marked arc is an early goniometer, so clinics could track tiny gains over time. At Walter Reed General Hospital in Washington, District of Columbia, patients around 1914 to 1918 practice engraving, carving tiny lines into metal plates as occupational therapy. Precision crafts like this were used to rebuild fine hand control and steady focus. At a first aid post in Courbevoie, France, between 1914 and 1918, a soldier covers his face and fights trembling while a medic holds him steady. This image became rare evidence that extreme stress can shut down the body even when nothing looks wrong. London, 1940. A narrow street is buried in fallen bricks, with sandbags guarding a doorway under an entry-only sign. After the heavy air raids that year, crews cleared so much debris that whole blocks had to be rebuilt almost from scratch. Florence, Italy, 1966. Cars sit half underwater as the Arno River overflowed and filled streets with dirty water and fuel. The flood damaged millions of books and artworks and sparked the Mud Angels volunteer wave that pioneered modern art rescue. In Caracas, 2 security officers speed through the streets on a motorcycle during the Caracazo unrest on February 27, 1989, faces covered against smoke and dust. Sparked by sudden fuel and bus fare hikes linked to International Monetary Fund reforms. London, England, 1909. A jewelry factory worker uses a powered polishing wheel to give tiny metal parts a mirror shine. This finishing step came right before Hallmark checks that stamped a hidden code for purity and maker that collectors still read today. Seattle, 1947. The Kalakala ferry looks like a floating Art Deco spaceship, covered in round windows that made it a celebrity in photos. Built in 1926 as Peralta, renamed Kalakala in 1935. Burma, the 1980s. A masked foreign volunteer poses in the forest with 2 very young Karen recruits in full field gear. The unsettling detail is their age, showing how long border uprisings could pull whole families into the same struggle. In 1954, a young British queen stands in formal dress holding a coronation regalia item made for her father, King George VI. It quietly links two generations because the same coronation objects are reused to signal continuity of rule. In Tennessee in 1906, workers shovel coal from a barge into a river steamboat, while passengers lean over the rail to watch. A busy steamboat could use many tons of coal in one day, so stops like this decided how far and how fast it could go. The United States ship New Jersey, an Iowa-class battleship, is captured as its forward turrets erupt in towering white smoke above the sea. Nicknamed Big J, it became the most decorated battleship in United States Navy history, and now sits as a museum in Camden, New Jersey. In Washington, District of Columbia, in May of 1971, troops from the 82nd Airborne Division rush across a field as a Chinook helicopter drops them near the Washington Monument during huge May Day demonstrations. That week led to more than 12,000 arrests in the city. Port Arthur, 1905. A once busy office is buried in rubble, with drawers torn open and papers scattered under broken windows. It was one of the first industrial-era sieges widely photographed, so images like this reshaped how the world pictured modern conflict. San Diego, California, May, 1941. United States Marines grin in bumper cars at Mission Beach, turning training downtime into a loud arcade moment. Just months before the Pacific War pulled them overseas, this ride captured a last slice of normal city life. On November 15, 1969, Soviet submarine K-19 surfaced with its bow badly bent after an accidental underwater contact with the United States submarine Gato. Even with the crushed front section, K-19 returned under its own power, and reports say no one on board was hurt. Budapest, Hungary, 1956. A disabled armored vehicle sits beside a row of wooden coffins on a street of broken facades after the Hungarian Revolution. After the Soviet takeover that autumn, about 200,000 Hungarians fled the country within weeks. British infantry move across open ground toward a trench line in Normandy in 1944, with dust rising from the fresh earth. Many trench systems there were dug in zigzag shapes to block straight sight lines. A Japanese airburst canister bursts into dozens of bright trails above a United States Liberator heavy bomber, turning the sky into a sudden net of light. Imperial Japanese Navy interceptors dropped these canisters to flood an aircraft's flight path with hot particles. In Pont-à-Mousson, France, February 1916, school children line up in early gas masks while nurses and teachers watch, turning a lesson into a drill. The eerie part is the masks themselves, because many early models were just cloth hoods with simple filters, near Poltava in the Soviet Union. In 1944, Soviet and United States airmen pose while writing messages on 300-pound metal cases prepared for a long-range flight. It comes from the short-lived shuttle campaign, where United States aircraft landed at Soviet bases between missions. On January 6, 1941, Italian and Libyan soldiers march in a huge column into British custody after the fall of Bardia in North Africa. Operation Compass took about 130,000 prisoners of war in just a few weeks, stunning the world. In 1936, Palestine, male and female fighters pose in a rough earth position during the Arab Revolt, showing how the uprising pulled in whole communities. Jacksonville, Florida, 1910. Wharf workers eat lunch on tarps and barrels along the St. Johns River docks, with tracks and warehouses stretching into the heat. This port boomed after the Great Fire of 1901, so the busy pier doubles as a snapshot of a city rebuilding fast. Whitney, Oxfordshire, England, in the 1890s. Women run loud power looms in a blanket mill, with baskets of bobbins and belts spinning overhead. Shifts of 10 to 12 hours were common, and one skilled operator could watch several looms at once to keep the cloth from tearing. Dumel na Przeciwdziałanie 5S on the Kola Peninsula. In April 1942, mountain troops in white snowsuits move on skis across an Arctic landscape, checking a dugout and gear in the drifts. This far north, spring could still feel like midwinter, sew full white clothing. Chemist Maudie Taylor sits beside a maze of glass lab equipment, a member of the top-secret Manhattan Project team during World War II. He later led Howard University's chemistry department and taught for nearly 30 years. In October 1944, the German heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen is seen with its bow badly crushed after an accidental collision with the light cruiser Leipzig. It later ended up in United States hands, was taken to Pacific test operations. In 1933, the crew of the United States ship Macon poses beneath the giant rigid airship inside a hangar, making the people look like toy figures under a floating city. Macon was a flying aircraft carrier that could launch and recover small fighter planes in midair using a retractable trapeze. April 1945. 4 women from the Warsaw Rising smile through a wire fence at the Stalag 6C detention camp just after they were freed. The strange power of this photo is the calm faces in a place built to erase hope, taken only weeks before the end of German rule in Europe. London, 1936. Arsenal supporters crowd around a steam locomotive at King's Cross, waving scarves and grinning before their trip to Huddersfield for the FA Cup semi-final against Grimsby Town. It is peak pre-television football culture when thousands followed the team by train. On March 24, 1945, German farm families cross a muddy field near Wessel, carrying only what they can hold as the Rhine crossing begins nearby. The crossing, called Operation Plunder, started the day before. Santo Domingo, 1965. 2 United States Marines take a quick soda break on a bright street while locals watch from the sidewalk. The moment comes from Operation Power Pack, when the United States landed over 20,000 troops. Late April 1991 in Bangladesh. An aerial view shows flooded ponds swallowing a village after Cyclone Marion pushed seawater deep inland. After this storm, Bangladesh expanded cyclone shelters and warning systems. London, 1965. People stand on the roofline of a bomb-damaged building to watch Winston Churchill's funeral procession pass below. More than 1 million lined the route, and the service was the first British state funeral to be broadcast on television. In March 1945, near Vienna, Soviet troops hurry past a house pouring smoke, captured in a blurred split second of a collapsing front line. A chalked regime emblem on the road hints how fast control was changing street by street as the war neared its end. At Bagram in May 1985, a Soviet political officer reads the Soviet Union Council of Ministers Decree No. 410 against heavy drinking, with a giant bottle prop staged beside him. It was part of Mikhail Gorbachev's anti-alcohol campaign that cut legal sales. In New York Harbor in 1885, the experimental underwater boat Peacemaker is hoisted by chains for a trial like a giant metal fish. Early boats like this often relied on muscle power and limited air, proving that people could travel below the surface decades before modern engines. On June 3, 1944, Soviet pilot Grigory Parshin shakes hands with Evgenia Barinova and Praskovia Barinova beside an aircraft they paid for with their personal savings. During the Second World War, thousands of citizens funded planes and tanks this way. Adolf Hitler sits on a small sled during a winter outing, a rare candid-style image far from staged public scenes. Photos like this were used to make powerful leaders look ordinary and harmless to the public. On January 1, 1993, 18-year-old ballerina Nina Brulik poses mid-dance inside a badly damaged Sarajevo building, photographed by Kevin Weaver for Getty Images. In 1924, children line up for a meal in the Wunsdorf refugee camp, while a chalkboard menu is written in Russian behind them. The quiet shock is how classroom routines were recreated inside a camp, as if normal life could be rebuilt one lunch at a time. Syria, 1973. An artillery position lies abandoned across a flat desert, with metal casings and broken gear scattered in every direction during the Yom Kippur War. The war lasted only about 3 weeks, yet it forced major changes in air defense. October 1973. After the Yom Kippur War, Israeli soldiers leaned from a window to use a field phone and call home with relief written on their faces. In a time before mobile phones, a single working line could mean a long queue of voices trying to prove they were still here. Przemysl, 1940. Soviet oil tank cars are formally handed over to German border officials, turning a snowy rail stop into high politics. From 1939 to 1941, these raw material deliveries and rubber transit helped Germany build fuel reserves that quietly shaped the next stage of the conflict. Kyiv, September 24, 1941. Khreshchatyk Street disappears under thick smoke as the central post office and nearby landmarks turn into jagged ruins. The shock is that hidden radio-controlled devices set off a planned chain reaction. United States, 1923. A telephone operator wears a chest harness that holds the mouthpiece in front of her face, letting her speak without lifting the handset. Made by American Bell Telephone Company, this early hands-free device sped up switchboard work. In North Africa during the Second World War, German paratroopers built a surreal desert wedding office with a table, helmets, and unit signs for a remote marriage registration. This system let the soldier sign in the field, while the bride signed at her local civil office. 1918. A ground crewman loads a rack of small aerial canisters onto the Halberstadt CL-2 named Brunhilde, its black cross stark against the fabric skin. The outside racks allowed quick reloading between flights, increasing how many missions a crew could fly in one day. 1910. A Navajo man sits wrapped in a bold patterned blanket, holding a hand drill used to spin fire or bore holes with steady rhythm. The drill is a quiet technology story because the same simple tool links daily craft, survival skills. Lörrach in South Baden, November 1940. A crowd packs under a window as an official holds up an item during a public auction of belongings taken from Jewish families who had been forced out. These sales turned theft into paperwork with proceeds routed to local authorities. Berlin, early June 1945. Soviet soldiers stand over a table covered with handcuffs and keys inside a former Gestapo prison wing. The pile of restraints turns the room into a chilling inventory. Chicago, 1933. A street crowd splits into two blocks as protesters speaking about hunger in Ukraine face off with American communist supporters, seen from high above the tram tracks. This rare overhead view captures how global politics could spill into one city corner. Russian Empire, early 1900s. A woman wears a kokoshnik covered in beadwork with a draped net veil that hides her face like a curtain of light. This look mixed old court tradition with fashion show drama designed to sparkle under lamps while keeping the wearer mysteriously anonymous. Japan, 1945. Women and teenagers bow and wave as uniformed military pilots in goggles salute from the back of a truck heading to an airfield. The send-off shows how the final months pulled civilians into public ritual. United States, 1960s. An engineer shakes hands with a full body pressure suit test dummy, its blank face and stiff gloves making the greeting feel unreal. These dummies were packed with sensors to measure leaks, pressure, and joint movement before a suit was trusted for real high altitude. Over Fallersleben on June 29, 1944, the B-24H Liberator Little Warrior tilts in the sky just after a direct hit from German anti-aircraft fire. Seconds later, the aircraft was lost with its crew, a single frame that freezes the exact moment before everything ends. In Cologne in March 1945, residents gather with bicycles on Neusser Platz to listen to announcements from an American administration car fitted with loudspeakers in front of St. Agnes Church. A sumo wrestler sits with legs wide on a low wooden bench in a cramped yard with plank walls and storage boxes, photographed in Japan in 1907. The stark pose and empty space around him make it feel like a formal portrait taken in an ordinary backlot. A small track tractor sits inside the dark cabin of a transport glider lined up with a narrow ramp leading out to the ground. Two people in coats stand at the doorway, making the machine feel surprisingly compact for something built to move heavy loads. Dozens of Soviet laborers stand in a tight line outside a brick mine entrance, wearing caps and heavy work coats, with a few barefoot on the stone ground. The caption places them at the Minister Achenbach mine in Brambauer Luhnen, Germany, on August 7, 1942. A man in a long coat stands beside two small children, posing on the running board of a large early car with white tires. Dated 1920, the scene feels like a family snapshot built around the car's boxy windows and the spare wheel mounted on the back. A uniformed instructor drills a line of Japanese civilian volunteers, many of them women, holding long bamboo poles in a courtyard. In 1945, Japan, the scene shows a tense, improvised last-line training where ordinary people are turned into a formal unit almost overnight. Rows of Fordson tractors and engines sit on display beside big tents and American flags at a public exhibition in Washington, District of Columbia. The signs highlight Lincoln and Ford models, making October 1922 feel like a proud, open-air showroom for the new age of farm power. A wrecked Mi-24 helicopter lies on a rocky slope as dark smoke rises, while two people walk toward the twisted body. The caption places this scene in Afghanistan in 1988, where a single silent frame shows how fast a huge machine can become scrap. Two young men pose on a simple river raft beside a palm leaf shelter with a hand-painted sign that reads, "Mambo Tango." The caption claims this was taken in Peru in June 1952 during a visit to a leprosy hospital, where the raft was built as a thank you gift. A black and white portrait shows a United States paratrooper in dress uniform, standing rigidly beside a wooden wall and a tall window. The caption says he served with the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division. A studio portrait from 1850 shows a bearded man in a dark coat and bow tie, hands clasped, with a healed mark high on his forehead. The caption says he was tied to the British retreat from Kabul in 1842, and that this mark came from a severe head injury. Three American soldiers in steel helmets pose behind stacked timbers inside a dim railroad workshop at Château Thierry, France, in 1918. One grips a mounted metal device with a linked feed belt, making the quiet industrial space feel like an improvised post. Italian motorcyclist Raffaele Alberti rides a 75 cubic centimeter Moto Guzzi in 1949 as he sets a world speed record. He is folded almost flat behind a tiny screen while the bike's smooth wheel covers slice through the air and the road smears into a single streak. A bearded man in a suit stands on a patio holding an open magazine framed by a hanging lamp and a plain white building. A shadowy figure lingers in the background, making the quiet scene feel strangely watched. A group of men in field clothes and military-style uniforms pose in a forest clearing beside a wooden post labeled Rio Roosevelt, some holding brimmed hats at their waists. The name on the marker turns the portrait into a quiet timestamp of an exploration-era river, renaming in progress. A uniformed crew uses ladders and a saw from the back of a large military truck to cut a towering poplar beside a quiet road in Korea in 1976. The photo is from Operation Paul Bunyan, when hundreds of United Nations Command personnel, a sleek thoroughbred named Man-O-War, charges down a dirt track with a jockey tucked low, captured mid-stride in an early 20th century race photo. Born in 1917 and living until 1947, he links the era of the Titanic to the years just before the nuclear age. A black and white photo shows two men in suits leaving a courthouse, escorted by several uniformed officers on the steps, with one man holding a cigarette. Their wrists appear linked, capturing a tense legal moment in 1967 America. A family in Israel poses in their living room wearing gas masks, including a child, during the 1991 Gulf War. The scene was inside a sealed room prepared for air raid alerts, turning a normal home into a temporary shelter. A woman speaks at an outdoor meeting while a row of suited men sit behind a table and a crowd gathers around. The caption claims this was an International Feminist Congress in Rome in 1923, with one prominent Italian politician seated among the officials. A Yemenite Jewish family walks barefoot across open desert, carrying bedding, pots, and a small child, with a camel visible behind them. The scene is linked to Operation Magic Carpet in 1949, when many Jews left Yemen for Israel in a mass airlift. An elegantly dressed woman in a jeweled gown and fur wrap lines up a shot on a billiards table, while a suited man watches from the shadows. Her pearls, gloves, and feathered hat make the game look like a formal night event, not a sports hall. 4 young people pose closely on a city doorstep, wearing a mix of civilian clothes and protective helmets, with one person holding a long metal object between their knees. Their relaxed smiles feel oddly calm for Europe in 1939. A London police officer in 1938 wears a round-eyed protective mask during a public safety drill, raising one gloved hand like a signal. A sign on his chest says, "Have you got yours?" which turns a routine test into a tense street message. In Berlin in 1914, uniformed officers paste an official notice onto a kiosk in the Tiergarten, while boys in straw hats stare up. The curious crowd captures the instant Germany shifts from summer street life to a military call-up. In Burma in the early 1940s, a uniformed man leads a cargo elephant through a muddy river crossing while 2 handlers ride on top. Behind them, more elephants fade into the haze, showing how supplies moved where roads could not. A United States Army private sits on the ground, carefully painting rows of wooden crosses, bright white, for a new military cemetery in Vierzeville-sur-Mer, France, on July 17, 1944. His helmet rests beside him, and the repeating crosses turn simple brushwork into a quiet record of a massive campaign. A line of camp prisoners digs a deep drainage trench in the Ruhr industrial region, while supervisors stand above the cut and watch the work. The scene from September 1943 shows how forced labor turned basic earth and water control into a tool of the Third Reich system. A man in woven ceremonial clothing, with a fur cap and a nose ring, poses while holding a large copper plate, like a prized emblem. The polished metal slab looks like a silent receipt of status in a culture where objects could carry power and history. A group of American prisoners of war walk out together after their release on the island of Formosa in 1945, many of them smiling despite their worn clothes. In the foreground, former Japanese guards stare ahead with tight. A huge crowd gathers at a new overpass with flags, bunting, and a sign that reads Gulf Freeway Dedication in Houston, Texas, in August 1952. Vintage cars crowd the road below, while people line the railing above, turning a road opening into a full street festival. Several men in striped camp uniforms stand in a bare yard, while uniformed guards watch near long barracks buildings. The caption says a hidden radio message was sent from Buchenwald on April 8, 1945, and help replied within minutes. A packed crowd gathers beside a passenger train at the Missouri Pacific Depot in Camden, Arkansas, as newly elected Governor George W. Hayes arrives in 1913 and leans from a car to shake hands. It looks like politics, rail travel, and new machines colliding in one loud moment. A huge early biplane sits on a grass field while a line of people stands beside it, and the Russian caption names it Ilya Muromets, built by Igor Sikorsky. The text says the first plane was finished in October 1913 and flew a demonstration in February 1914. A giant seated Buddha statue in Kamakura, Japan, towers over a small group of tourists posing on a platform at its base in 1882. The people look tiny beside the calm face. On a dirt track near Muskogee, Oklahoma, in 1939, 3 men push a roadster while another steers it through open farmland. The front wheel looks improvised, turning the trip to a repair shop into a slow team effort. Around 1900 in Bisbee, Arizona, a crowd of men in suits and hats pack around a saloon table to play faro, with chips and cards spread in tight rows. The scene captures how mining town leisure could revolve around one fast card game watched by a wall of serious faces. Two men in aprons work quietly at benches in a cramped early 20th century workshop, surrounded by hand tools, curved metal parts, and wooden frames leaning against the wall. The mix of bicycle-style components and precision jigs hints at experiments that were pushing machines from the ground into the air. A motorcade of early cars and police motorcycles rolls across the newly opened George Washington Bridge in 1931, while crowds line the side under rows of American flags. The huge steel tower and thick suspension cables make the roadway look like a ribbon stretched into the sky. A man carrying a child walks across a windy field of tents in Guthrie, Oklahoma Territory in 1889 with the handwritten words, "Looking for a town lot," scratched into the ground. The plane number 23 beside him makes the scene feel like a real-time land claim. A mustached man in a wide-brim hat sits on a horse above a rail town nestled in dry mountains. The scene is linked to Mexican railway engineer Jesus Garcia in 1907, remembered for moving hazardous freight away from Nacozari to protect the town. A young woman reaches up in a busy street and kisses an American soldier leaning down from a packed military vehicle while other soldiers grin at the camera. The mix of mud-stained uniforms, dangling tags, and crowded faces turns one quick kiss into a snapshot of reunion after long separation. 5 circus performers pose in a studio wearing matching dark bodysuits with ruffled collars, curled horn headpieces, and bold face paint that makes their expressions look like masks. Their tight formation and identical styling feel like a carefully branded act designed to shock and entertain in a single glance. 3 women wrapped in heavy shawls stand close together on a city sidewalk, mid-conversation, while a few figures linger in the hazy background near a doorway. The caption links the scene to a New York City food price protest in 1910. A vintage car drives through a flooded Krakow street as people hug the building walls, with water swirling around the tires and splashing into the roadway. Behind the car, a small kayak glides through the same floodwater, making the scene feel like a city turning into a canal for a day. Soldiers of the 1st Polish Armored Division stand on the huge hull and turret sections of a German Maus super heavy tank at the Krupp Works in Meppen, Germany, May 1945. The scale is so extreme that the metal parts look like small buildings beside the men. 2 British soldiers in full-dress uniform pose with Taffy IV, a regimental goat wearing a miniature coat and harness like a serious unit member. The goat is said to have served with the regiment in France during the First World War and was awarded the 1914 Star Campaign Medal. Józef Andrzejczak stands with his bicycle outside a building entrance in Poland in 1939 beside a poster that reads, "Strong, compact, ready," and advertises an anti-aircraft defense loan with plane silhouettes. The calm street scene sits under a loud warning message.